Hello, everyone. This is Philosophy for the People with Ben and Stefan. And this week we're talking about utilitarianism, free will, and the left. So basically, circling the drain of what we've been doing for much of the period. Did you see that Elisa Yudowski, famed utilitarian and definitely not a leftist, had recently written an article in Times Magazine?
I did not. What'd you say?
Well, it was about AI and about how the fact is it's going out of control or whatever. And he called for a complete pause, ban, or whatever of AI development in the United States. But do you know what his plan was, or the lengths he was willing to go to make sure, say, China falls along with that?
What's it?
Nuclear war.
Sure.
He
Why not?
directly advocates use of nuclear weapons in order to make ChatGPT not go too fast, which is really fantastic. Also, everyone, because there was still complaints about my sound last week, the microphone is now right in front of my face, which serves two purposes. The first one is because apparently when you make it closer, it sounds better. And the second one is to kind of demonstrate on screen that I haven't got some fucking cheapo microphone. I've got a good one. And if there is a problem with my sound, it's probably something else. Though I do believe that there are sound problems, but it's not this fucking massive thing here. So Ben, what's the article about?
Yeah. So as you say, the article, which can be found at Philosophy for the People, that's benburgis.substack.com, is called "How to Be a Leftist Without Being a Utilitarian or Free Will Skeptic." And this was actually teased several ago, right? So in I think there were two previous essays about the free will debate. There was the Sam Harris has nothing useful to say about free will, and then there was Slavoj Žižek, the case for compatibilism. And in one of those, I don't remember which one, I sort of said in passing, it's like, look, I've had this idea for a while for an essay that was like directly going to be about the politics of this debate, but that's not what we're doing here, right? Like in those other cases, the Sam Harris one, it was responding to Sam Harris's arguments against free will. In the Slavoj Žižek, the case for compatibilism one, it was making positive arguments for my position, also yours, just compatibilism, not free will determinism. But in this one, talking not about these debates directly for the most part, right? In other words, not about whether, like, all things considered, utilitarianism is the way of thinking about morality that makes the most sense, and not about whether or not we have free will or would have it if determinism is true or anything like that, but instead about the political valence of these positions, because it seems to me, right, from what I could tell from kind of my adventures on the online left, that a lot of people, frankly, probably who are watching us right now, right, have this combination of positions. In other words, a lot of people who are leftists, who don't necessarily have aren't necessarily people with like a academic background or whatever, but are kind of people, right? Leftists who like take an interest in philosophy, who have excellent, look forward to it. Leftists who whose range of interests includes philosophical questions, and read up about it a little bit, watch videos about it, watch these streams. I think a lot of people in that category, this is an anecdotal impression, so I can't put a number on it, but I think a lot of people in that category think that these positions, utilitarianism about ethics and skepticism about the existence of free will, are a natural fit with their and my politics, and this is what I'm taking issue with here. Like, not and I try to be very clear at a couple points. That's like, I'm not saying, well, these conclusions don't actually jive with nice leftist political commitments, therefore they're false. I think that has to be fought out. I mean, if this is just the sad news about reality, then fair enough, right? Where our politics can adjust accordingly. But it is a debate in its own right that interests me, because I very frequently see the claim that there are all these nice leftist takeaways from these positions, and I think that's just completely wrong.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the ones where I didn't feel like an instant kind of like, I agreed with you, but I didn't feel like an instant click of identification that many people actually think this. But I'm sure chat will tell us otherwise at some point. But one thing I did think was important that you get to eventually is I feel like there is like a lack of a really coherent idea of how justice should work.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are like a few different, layers to this. And, as you say, I mean, my anecdotal impression could be wrong. I don't know, how many people really have, this combination of views. I'll certainly at least say it's a combination I've run into and I'm interested in thinking about. Um, but but yeah, I think that so there are a few different pieces of this combination of positions and sort of things about how like why I think the opposite is true get into, but one of them is this thing about justice that in other words, do we like what is it that we find so objectionable about the status quo or neoliberalism or capitalism itself or any of that? Um, is it just that we think that there would there would be better outcomes if we had something else, or is there more to it than that, right? I mean, are there things that are like in principle objectionable about this? Do people have do people have rights that are trampled by these economic arrangements? And if you think that they do, that that there's that like they have in principle that are trampled by those arrangements, then you must think there are such things as in principle, right? And you're not just a purist. You're not just somebody who thinks that it's like all there is to normativity is just like try to get good things to happen and
Counting.
bad things not to happen. Counted, yes, exactly.
You are kind of you have like some slight internet problems out there, by the way.
Some slight what problems?
Internet problems. Like you're a bit
Oh no. Okay.
you're
I might
lagging
I
a
might
little
I
bit
might have to
occasionally.
I might have to switch
There
switch
hasn't been any
locations.
significant problems so far, but I just thought I should say now at the beginning.
Sure. Well, if we continue to have problems, I'll just turn off my video again for a minute while we talk and relocate.
So you don't show everyone every feature of your house.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I think that so I should say, to the extent that this is a phenomenon, and it's not just three guys I happen to have spent a lot of time talking to, then I think that one of the big things that drives it is that there are a lot of positions that people correctly dislike. That
Right, that was
they
one
think,
thing we spoke about and spoke
yeah,
about with people in chat when we first talked about this, which is basically the idea of some kind of like Christian conservative retributivism, and that's kind of
mhm.
what people like. There's a big reaction against that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there are all of these reactionary positions that in some way or another rely on the idea of free will. will, or the idea of sort of in consequentialist moral rights, quite correctly loathe. And then where I think they make a mistake is thinking, well, okay, the way to fight against these positions is to sort of reject the most basic foundation that they're built on, which would be like belief that people are in control of their actions, or there are such things as non-consequentialist moral rights, and I think that that's really misguided for a few reasons. One of which is the one we're about, that I think that you're sort of that the suicide bomb that you're setting off philosophically when you say these basic concepts is that we don't get to use them either, and you're losing a lot of the principled arguments for our positions. And then the other problem is that it's just so unnecessary that that it just like this just strikes me as like, say, the essay, like kind of responded to an insect crawling up the wall by napalm in the house, that like you just don't need to do that to kill the insect. And with all of these kinds of positions, so the sort of very harsh retributivism about criminal justice, or kind of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps victim blaming about economic inequality, or belief in absolutist property rights, and opposition to redistribution based on that. Like, in all of these cases, it just seems to me that there are like so many other places to get off the bus besides at the stop of, okay, we just don't have free will at all, or
Right.
nobody's responsible for anything they do, or nobody has any real moral rights. It's like they just you're just like, you don't want to go to the place that's like 20 stops down the line, and you think the only way to avoid it is to get off at the first stop.
So should we kind of briefly go through kind of utilitarianism or consequentialism and then free will? Obviously
Sure.
stuff we've done before, but it's good to go over them. And
Yeah, no,
also to
I think it's
clarify,
probably.
like, is the problem here? It's in the title. Is utilitarianism, but are we talking about consequentialism generally or utilitarianism specifically?
Yeah, right, exactly. So consequentialism is just any sort of view according to which morality is only about good and bad consequences. Utilitarianism is a particular kind of consequentialism. It's definitely the most popular kind, but there are other kinds. If you're like an ethical egoist, you might just be that it's like, yeah, the only thing that matters are good consequences for me. I guess that's a position that could only be stated in the first person. The and
Right. I
Of
mean, ethical
course,
egoism is something which has a real problem with like indexicals.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So this is so like that's one kind of consequentialism, but of course, in terms of the particular combination of views, however widespread or not, that I'm pushing back against here, it's not. Which I should also say, like, I do think there are reasons to think that it's at least not a super uncommon combination of positions for a certain kind of online leftists, but it's also certainly very fairly common the other way around, that people who like are like free will skeptics, for example, will say, "Oh, this is a great advantage of this position, that it lets you avoid all this terrible reactionary stuff."
Right.
But anyway, the people who hold the combination of positions I'm criticizing are obviously not going to be ethical egoists, right? The kind of consequentialism that's going to appeal to them is going to be impartial consequentialism, and that's probably going to end up being something like utilitarianism. So utilitarianism is the view that we're interested in good consequences and bad consequences in general, regardless of who's experiencing them, and that could either be the sort of most straightforward kind of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism classic is just the only thing that's ultimate, is hedonistic, in the original sense, right? Not like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but like that the only thing that's intrinsically good is happiness. Everything else that's good is good because it leads to happiness. Only thing that's intrinsically bad is suffering. Everything else that's bad is bad, because it leads to suffering. So we, what we're interested in is just maximizing the amount of happiness that exists. And at least the classical version of view, we're just sort of totally disinterested in how that's distributed. And then you could have like different tweaks on it, and those differences aren't going to make a huge differences for our purposes today. But like certainly one, like Robert Nozick, the one time he had a good point was about the experience machine. This thing about, okay, would you voluntarily go into like Vanilla Sky, if you've ever seen that, would you ever voluntarily go into an artificial reality where you were going to be happier than you would be outside, but none of it would be real, and perhaps the first thing the experience machine does to you is it erases your memory of agreeing to go into the machine. So that takes out the element of well, is it that you're not really happy because it's not real, right? You don't know that it's not real while you're in there, but if you still don't like the idea, that suggests that you don't only value happiness, you also value other things, in this case, connection to objective external reality. And so this sort of thing has led some utilitarians to reluctantly let go of hedonism and say, okay, maybe we shouldn't talk about happiness exactly. Maybe we should be talking about like preference satisfaction, and generally the thing that people prefer is happiness.
Was Nozick also the utility monster guy, or was it someone else?
Is that Nozick?
You give a very funny example of a utility monster in the essay, which is a literal utility monster.
Yeah.
As in, it has utility and it's also a monster.
yeah, exactly. So, this might come from Nozick. I kind of associate this with Derek Parfit, but he might have been quoting Nozick. I don't know. But yeah, the utility monster. Oh, it is Nozick originally. Okay, yeah. I guess that feels like a Nozick example. So yeah, they have. Well, the version of the utility monster I give is just kind of in passing, because it's like, okay, so one of the features of utilitarianism many people find understandably morally attractive is that it has a is that since it doesn't make morality just being about being a rational agent or whatever, so it makes sense, the idea of moral obligations non-human animals. So it said, okay, you could give them credit for that, but before you give them too much credit, think about this scenario. And it's basically it's a utility monster example for animal ethics. So it's like you imagine the aliens from the Alien movies have implanted their eggs in your dog, and in fact every other domestic dog in the world. And if nothing's done, all of the xenomorphs are going to come ripping out of their chests like in the Alien movies and kill them. Now, there's good news. Human scientists have figured out a way to stop this from happening. But on the other hand, we've also figured out that the xenomorphs have tremendous capacity for happiness, much more than dogs. And they're each of them, once they come out bursting out, is going to experience not only more happiness than the dog would the rest of their life, but enough extra happiness to make up for the suffering that's involved in the process, and and any sadness that we all feel at watching and watching our dogs be devoured.
Yeah, I don't think it would be sadness I would feel.
Well, maybe eventually you get there.
Like horror, revulsion.
All the negative emotions that you're
it would be enough to make up for that. Is a more basic one where it's kind of like, it's just like a guy who experiences pleasure 1 billion times more intensely than everyone else, and the question is, should we treat that person like with 1 billion times more regard? And the utilitarian kind of has to say yes, but instinctively you're like,
Yeah, exactly.
no, that doesn't really make any sense at all. That doesn't seem to be what morality is about. Because that example, I bring that up because that example works a lot better for me than the experience machine, which I feel like it's one of those thought experiments which works best because you leave stuff out in the sense of kind of like it works because it convinces people because they're thinking like, oh well, what will happen to my family in the real world and what will happen blah 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 like this. And like if you
Yeah,
told people, you can get in this machine, but also all your friends and family will get into machine and nothing bad will happen in the world generally for your absence, then I think people will be a lot more convinced.
yeah. I don't think so. I mean, I agree that some people might be might be like that if you don't clarify that, there's confused issue. But I do tend to think that, like, even when you say, okay, don't worry, everybody else is getting the same offer. So you're not like, they're not just going to be like bereft, without you, right? I mean, the question is like, should we all, I mean, it's sort of, the utilitarian right into time or whatever. We get like a relatively benevolent version of the thing they're worried about, right? The AI gives this collective choice to humanity, right? Should we collectively enter into experience machines? If you still don't like the idea, right? Um, then I think that suggests that you do feel at least some pull towards other values, besides only happiness.
I mean, to be clear, if any future AI gods are watching and have included this data in their training sample, I would be perfectly happy to enter the matrix, just so you know. But
Fair
the other
enough.
half of the question is about free will, which we've
Yeah,
gone over,
exactly.
I think, probably the most times in this show. But we'll freely
Yeah,
continue
because
to do so, and there's nothing you can do to stop us.
yeah, 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 because there were two previous essays that were about this, but yeah, those essays were about this sort of the rights and wrongs of the issue itself, right? This is about the sort of intersection between that and left politics. But yeah, I mean, just briefly on the concept itself, I think um, a I think sort of a good enough um, gloss on what we mean by free will for the purposes of this discussion is that it's like whatever kind of control you have to have over your actions in order to be morally responsible for them, uh, and to be objectively morally responsible for them. In other words, like, somebody who has precisely the combination of views being criticized could say, um, well, sure, nobody is like in some deep in principle way responsible for anything they do, but like sometimes it has good consequences if we pretend. But that's not what I'm talking about, right? They have a like saying, uh, whatever kind of control you have to be actually morally responsible for your actions. And I think that's a very uninformative definition that just about everybody could get together on. And to think about, um, even though of course people have varying opinions on what kind of control that would be, ranging from uh, you what the cognitive mechanism in your brain has to be capable of, a sort of range of things that like adult humans who aren't suffering from certain kinds of severe illnesses and disabilities could generally do, and other kinds of beings generally can't. That imagine different courses of action. Like consider and deliberate on different plans. Be like consider and reject reasons for and against different courses of action, all that stuff. So that's the position. I think, just for the sake of convenience, we can call that the correct position. And then the other, then other positions are, no, that's not good enough, because in order to be genuinely in control of your actions, or less tendentiously, compatibilism would be that position. And then the other position would be, no, that's not good enough. you have to be free in some kind of transcendent sense in order to be in order to be in control of your actions, the right way to be responsible for them. The kind of control that you need would be, like at the very least involve freedom from deterministic chains of cause and effect. And honestly, sometimes when people describe what they have in mind, it almost seems like, um, it almost seems like we'd be talking about like being like a sort of miniature, unmoved mover, right? The same way
Yeah.
that like God creates things, but nobody creates God.
I mean,
That
I was I
you're
was talking to
sort of
someone who was advocating against free will, and I was asking them like, what possible circumstances would you accept that there was free will? And I even gave this
yeah,
example of like a mini unmoved mover who like came into being as the first being in like like a white blank universe, And he's like, actually thinking about
yeah,
it, I don't think that would even count for me. So it is this thing of like, I mean, that's not like necessarily a knockdown argument against it, but I think when people have a
sure,
theory of free will such that it's impossible under any possible circumstances, in the broadest possible sense,
yeah.
then I think it's probably a problematic theory of free will you've got there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you like the sort of original data that we're working with is, our pre-philosophical belief that, people sometimes things are people's fault, that they can't be your fault if, if you're not, if it wasn't up to you in some important sense, all that. Like I think it would be kind of deeply surprising if it turned out that like what we really meant when it got right down to it was that you had to
Was
have
something
this
that
like kind
no
of
one has
godlike
ever
freedom
had,
from
not even a
causation.
little.
Yeah, yeah. Something not only that nobody's ever had, not even a little, but something that it's like extremely obvious that nobody's ever had, right? That they had that like nobody could ever get mixed up into thinking that maybe we had that because like it's so manifestly beyond, you know, beyond human potential. That's probably not what we ever had in mind, right? They have probably we had in mind some more grounded sense of control, but there's obviously a giant debate about this, and uh, and I think like the last free will essay, Slavoj Žižek, The Case for Compatibilism, was kind of my attempt to sort of give like a positive argument for compatibilism about free will and determinism. But you know, all I'm really trying to do in this one is just sort of like give people enough of a sense of how the debate works that we can kind of keep going and think about how it intersects with the political question.
Yeah, so Ben, so now that you've established that we have free will, that means we're putting everyone in jail, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so this is one of the big worries that people have. I think, like people who are leftists who don't like the idea of free will. I think one of the main reasons is that they associate sort of free will and moral responsibility talk with people who have these kind of extreme punitive views about criminal justice, which I should say, like in the society that I spend most of my time living in, the United States, there's I think like we really have gone kind of completely insane collectively on this topic, right? I mean, people, um, mass incarceration in the United States has got into this kind of just stunning historic levels, and it's been peeled back a little bit maybe since like the late '90s, but still really bad. And I think that culturally we've internalized the idea that people deserve like really extreme punishments. That that if you have like uh sure, like, so I think this is a lot of what people who are sort of think that they have lefty kind of political reasons to dislike the idea of free will and moral responsibility. This is what they're reacting to is is these cultural attitudes where like we sort of like we hear that somebody, you know, did something really bad and, you know, they only got 5 years in prison and we think, oh Jesus, they just got a slap on the wrist, right? That's you know, like I can't believe they got off with only 5 years in prison. And, you know, that's nuts, right? I mean, like I think like even 5 years of being confined against your will to a room in a luxury hotel, I think is pretty nightmarish if you really
Or even
start
the whole
thinking about
hotel, really.
or yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like The Shining, right? So yeah, yeah, it's pretty nightmarish if you actually let yourself think about it. Like take it seriously, don't just
I
blow
mean,
it off.
you do give some decisive examples otherwise, and you are arguing now. But my first instinct when someone's like, you know, well, if we have free will, then you know we can all be locked up and thrown away the key. I'm like, well, without free will, then what's even the problem of putting someone in prison? You know, I mean, you're not taking their freedom away because they don't have any in the first place. The only problem is that they don't like it, which
Yeah,
is always feels a bit thin to me.
right.
Because we could
Yeah.
make them like it, I'm sure, if we tried hard enough.
Yeah. So prison plus the brain chip to make you like prison is still seems pretty objectionable to me. So yeah, that's a fair point. So yeah, I think that so and the point I make in the essay is like, look, start start with the kind of insane super retributivism that we're all just kind of culturally soaking in the United States. You know, maybe other societies to varying like you can be a retributivist, right? A retributivist thinks that at least some people, at least some of the time, um, should be punished for purely just because they deserve it, right? Not because it serves some
Yeah.
greater good, just because they deserve to be punished. Like you could be a retributivist and still think that the United States had completely gone over the bend on punishment and still think that like we really need to roll back mass incarceration and all of that stuff because it's like obvious. I mean, this is just a really basic point. But there's a hell of a gap between some punishment for some things some of the time and like we should be, you know, I mean, again, like 5 years of being locked in a luxury hotel would be really nightmarish. Um, you know, if you've seen the movie Old Boy, you know, think about the you know the setup of that movie, right? They have it's not a luxury hotel exactly, right? But it's like, but in that'd be really nightmarish. Never mind a real prison, even a real Norwegian prison. Never mind the kind of dungeons that we have in this country. That's so that's insane, and seeing that it's insane is totally compatible with retributivism. That's the first point. Second point is like, okay, you need to believe in free will to be a retributivist, but that doesn't mean that just because you believe in free will, that retributivism somehow follows from that. Like you need a lot of other premises to get to retributivism besides just free will. That they like you could absolutely believe that have all sorts of views about what if anything justifies criminal punishment without that are non-retributivist while still believing that people are morally responsible, right? Like that you could say like one of the things that needs to be true for retributivism to make sense is that people are sometimes morally responsible for their actions, but that's not the only one. I mean, they like it's it's just um, like yeah, you could think that it's like sometimes people are responsible for their actions. That's nice, that's true, but that doesn't nothing follows from that in itself about what the correct way is for society to respond to those actions. Like I say in the essay, you could sure, uh, you if you believe that people who commit serious crimes are responsible for their actions, that's consistent with thinking they deserve to be cut into little pieces and fed to wolves, but it's also consistent with thinking they deserve mercy and a second chance. It's like it's belief in moral responsibility consistent with of approaches to how to think about criminal justice besides retributivism. I give three examples in the essay. One of them is that you could. One of them is that you could believe in, like, I think HLA Hart has this view that, as I understand it, says that, okay, it's categorically wrong to imprison innocent people, and we all, like, we all start with a right not to be imprisoned, um, and you can lose that right as a result of actions for which you're responsible. But just because you've lost that right, that doesn't by itself give us a reason to put you in prison. We still need a good reason.
I mean, often I feel like retributivists, like proper ones, will often call for punishments other than imprisonment, right? Like, they're the guys that say, no, you shouldn't go to jail for 6 months. We should, like, whip you a bit. Which, to be honest, I think it's probably much better to whip people a bit than to send them to jail.
Sure. I mean, if those are the options, then maybe, yeah. That seems like maybe that feels like a Peter Hitchens thing I'd read in the mail on Sunday. So let's bring back the whipping, the town square.
Yeah, but I mean, often how these legal systems actually turn out, like Singapore, is they have whipping, but they also have life in prison for, like, drug smuggling. So
yeah, right. Yeah. But you could think, like, look, whether the punishment we're contemplating is imprisonment or flogging or fines, or picking up trash on the side of the road, you could still think, well, look, all of these things are things that inflict one sort or another of suffering. It's generally bad to inflict suffering, and even if somebody has lost this sort of, like, absolute right to not have that happen to them, that still, also else being equal, we shouldn't do it. We still need some kind of, like, good reason, like protecting public safety to do it, right? So that's one of the approaches I talk about. Another is restorative justice, which is all about the idea that, like, you should have that, instead of thinking about, like, you did something, you deserve to be punished, like, what you did to somebody has created a problem that you need to sort of that problem by having some sort of process where you get together and talk to the victim and figure out what that. And there are there's something that's this is something I'm, like, generally open-minded to. I think there are all sorts of questions you could raise about whether we could even have them that was purely based on nothing but this, what that would look like, whether that would be designed. And that is there are many cans being open at the same time there. But my point, just for the purposes of this essay, is just to say, okay, look.
I was going to say it's a very feudal approach, this kind of reconciliation.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. I can see that. Yeah. Yeah. So, and but, like, if you think that's the right approach, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you do, my point would just be that not only is that consistent with thinking that people are morally responsible for their actions, it's kind of hard to understand the rationale behind all of this if you don't think that people are responsible for their actions. At least the sort of standard intuitive way of explaining the idea certainly seems to assume moral responsibility, that the onus is on you to restore what you have ripped asunder because you did something bad, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean,
like
we talked about this before, right? Where the idea of, like, if we don't have free will, then why am I doing restorative justice if I've done the crime? Why can't Ben do it? If I've broken a fence, why can't we just punish Ben for it? As long as I won't learn it, say I'll learn absolutely no lesson, but maybe Ben will actually become a better man because he does offense. Why don't we just punish Ben instead?
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, and then, like, to really drive the point home, we could even say, look, let's say you're some kind of ultra abolitionist about like punishment in general. Like, not only are you a prison abolitionist, which is a position some people actually hold, but you go beyond probably what like almost any actual prison abolitionist would advocate and say that we just should never like make anybody do anything as we're in response to crimes that they commit. No community service, no fines, no state mandated restorative justice circles, no anything, right? That like it's just all bad because like nobody should ever be punished for anything. Um, Now, to be clear, I don't think this is a particular, but to really from the point about how many steps you have to go from just believing in moral responsibility to even being a retributivist, never mind the kind of ultra retributivist you have to be to think that like American style mass incarceration is okay. Um, Even this ultra abolitionist position is totally consistent with belief in moral responsibility. Like, that they're all, because look, there are all kinds of bad things that people do that we all normally intuitively think that they're responsible for, that, they do bad things. It's their fault. But we don't think that the state should like step in and punish them in some way for it, right? Like
Right.
if if your girlfriend cheated on you and broke your heart, you presumably don't think she should be arrested for it, So
Well, I
given,
people did think that until relatively recently, but yeah.
yeah, fair enough. But if you are a you know a native-born intellectual citizen of the 21st century, you
If you're a
probably
fucking millennial,
yes, you probably don't think she should be arrested for that. And so, if you could, which means that you could see in principle how you could believe that somebody could be morally responsible for doing something bad, but you don't think they should be, punished, which I think is enough to like really drive home the point that if your worry is, oh, I don't want to believe in moral responsibility because I don't want to end up because I don't want to end up believing in retributivism. Like, guys, don't worry. There is such a large gap between those two things.
yeah.
Somebody in the chat says it's illegal to cheat on your spouse in Taiwan. That's all right.
Yeah, adultery is really like an interesting thing where it's like it is good for making the distinction because I think people will often conflate, well, from the actual law, but also like an idealized law that kind of like stuff which is immoral should be illegal,
Yeah,
and legal stuff
right.
is immoral stuff. But actually, these are four separate categories, right? You can have stuff which should be legal but is immoral. You can have stuff which should be illegal but actually is moral, and so on and so on. And often
Yeah, I don't think.
people will use that to say that kind of they won't want to say that certain things are immoral. Like they'll be reluctant to say that adultery is immoral because they think by saying that then it should be banned. But no, it's a different thing.
I mean, it's clearly, yeah, it's clearly like maybe it's clearly, at least in circus, all else being equal, a bad thing to do to somebody. But yes, it would be crazy to think that that should be. There are certainly things that are like it certainly at least like should be illegal, but like separate from the fact that we've made them illegal, there's no particular moral problem with them. Like an obvious case is like it's there's nothing that's like intrinsically wrong with driving at either the right or left side of the road, but like
Yes.
a society should pick one and legally mandate it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a classic
Uh,
example. But this is why when I'm playing Grand Theft Auto games, I always drive on the left because it's the right way.
it's not just oh, I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Look, I'm not going to be some kind of cultural relativist about this. Like, clearly, this is correct.
Yeah, when I need to draw my sword to strike the man coming across me, then it's the right position to be on the road.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
That's the fake history version of how it came to be in Britain, but I don't know if it's actually related to any facts.
Yeah, that does kind of have a whiff to it of like something that people repeat
Like
a
when
lot
people like
because
make up
because like
acronyms, like for fuck.
yeah, fair enough.
We see both at the same time. Though I can only type I can only type in the TIR chat, but I can see both chats and highlight
Yeah,
both chats.
both do come up in this. So we're in Silver. The way this works, we're in
What actually happens is
Restream.
Ben never reads the chat, and I read it. So if you type at Ben, it's probably not going to be seen.
That's a slander. I read I read the chat like 5% of the time. But yeah. So yes, we're in the streaming service we're using is Restream, and while you're in Restream, it shows you the chat for both. Is the boring answer there?
Exciting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how does this then? I guess the question is, do you? I mean, this is always the Marxist question I want to ask.
Sure. Yeah.
Why do you think it's common for people on the left to end up with identical views to Sam Harris? Or should we just do?
Yeah.
Or should we just do the genealogy of that? ContraPoint says that basically all leftists used to be new atheists.
You know, and I think she's exaggerating, but I don't think she's making that up out of nothing. There are, I mean, as somebody who knows a lot of leftists and recently wrote a book about Christopher Hitchens, this is something I've been in many conversations about, and it is quite common for like leftists of a certain age to have gone through a new atheism phase back when. Um, and it's actually always really interesting to see the sort of range of attitudes that people have about it, thinking back to it, sort of going uh, from oh, that's so embarrassing to like, yeah, that's all kind of still right, like, and at various points in between, or everything but the Islamophobia is good or whatever. But yeah, I think so. Yeah, to the extent that this is a phenomenon that that you get leftists or a certain kind of leftists with this exact combination of positions that Sam Harris has, utilitarianism about morality and skepticism about free will. I think that, yeah, I mean, look, I think the ContraPoint's explanation probably is actually a little bit of it, that it's like, some people have like actually at a certain point in their past, they read Sam Harris's books and they found them convincing. So that's
Which is also true of the
you
people
know,
speaking. Well, not specifically Sam Harris, but the rest of them. I was Dawkins and you were
sure.
Dawkins.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, look, I have I mean, I never found the particular Sam Harris books we're talking about convincing. I'm sure there are plenty of things that Sam Harris said about other subjects that I nodded along to, and for sure, um, Hitchens and Dennett and Dawkins. That's like, yeah, absolutely, lots of stuff those guys said. I found convincing at the time, and it's like obviously you kind of have to take it a la carte looking back on it. But
Sam Harris was a person when at 12 I was like really into new atheist stuff and wanted to read them all, and then I read Sam Harris's Letter to a Christian Nation, and I was like, oh, this is a bit boring.
yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I think as like a writer on these subjects, as like a polemicist, like Hitchens was definitely the best of the lot. Dawkins, I think, is a very talented like communicator about like biology, popularizing science, and he's like very good at that. I think that.
And
I think
that's the good bit about the God delusion when he's actually talking about evolution.
right, exactly, yeah. and where he wanders into more philosophical territory, it gets a lot worse. And you know, even his writing gets worse. And you know, Daniel Dennett is there's kind of a reason that if people could only name three of the four horsemen, it's he's probably the odd man out. Even though like he's probably the one with the least dishonorable trajectory over time. But
I'm a massive Dennett fan.
yeah,
Not to do with religion, to do with philosophy of mind and so on.
yeah. I can see that. And then yeah, I think then Harris, like, it's always even like the so much of his like. I also think that, like, for anybody who had leftist inclinations at the time, if they were going to sort of pick one to raise an eyebrow or two at, it might be Harris, because it's like, if out of like those, if you think about the religion books, the God Delusion for Dawkins, the Breaking the Spell for Dennett, God is Not Great for Hitchens, and the End of Faith for Harris. Out of the four, the End of Faith is the one that's like the most purely a like a post 9/11 kind of book, right? It's very it like really foregrounds that context of like, oh, you know, religion is bad because, you know, because people are going to like strap themselves to suicide vests. And so if you're somebody who had a different attitude than Harris did towards, you know, George W. Bush and the global war on terror and everything, you know, it's like that might be, if one of those books was going to bother you, even if you had new atheistic inclinations, then that was, you know, that was certainly going to be it.
Though, as we talked about last week, remember I did support the Iraq War as a tiny child.
Yes. Well, yeah, I'll give you a pass on that because you were a tiny child.
But yeah, I think it is.
You weren't like writing a column for the New York Times.
Yeah, I think the point I'd make is that it does feel like the natural kind of politics which emerge out of a no free will utilitarian person is some kind of neoliberal kind of total management of the subject. Because there's no real reason that we should respect people's freedom or choices or anything like that in of itself. There's absolutely no value there structurally beyond the degree to which they'd be annoyed at us if we tried to impact on their freedom.
And the brain chips will take care of that. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. So I do think, like, to answer your original question, it's like, yes, I think the ContraPoints explanation is probably part of the answer. Um, uh, like, yeah, actually, when I was writing about free will for the Substack before, I mean, I had, like, you know, Eric Levitz, you know, who's not necessarily somebody you'd associate with this, being like, oh, I thought that Harris book was pretty good, whatever, you know, like, so that's definitely part of the explanation. But I also think a big part of the explanation is the one I gave in the essay, that it's just people sort of are reasoning backwards in a way that they haven't thought about enough, from like, here are all these odious positions that, like, what if the premises that you need to get there is belief in free will or belief in intrinsic moral rights? And I don't like the conclusions. So, you know, and people who advocate these positions place a lot of rhetorical emphasis on that particular premise. So you can kind of see how that leads people to rejecting it. And, you know, but frankly, I mean, I guess to be more combative about this, I also think that, like, some of the blurry lines between liberalism and actual leftism in kind of the culture wars of the 21st century probably also play a role, that, you know, that people end up seeing the world to a certain extent the way that, like, you know, neoliberal technocrats do. And that actually does.
I mean, I think a lot of the appeal for not believing in free will for average online leftists is because the position is unpopular.
Yeah, no, there is that, right? That it's
fucking normies believe in free will, and
yeah,
you're less of a sicko normie if you reject free will.
Yeah, rejected it is extremely based. Yes, they have and some of the same points apply to utilitarianism, right? It's like it's just,
because utilitarianism is kind of like the cold dissolution of all that comes before, right? all kind of
Yeah.
traditions and all these kind of ideas that you've been imposed upon by boring adults as a child. All of them have a completely legitimate dissolution under utilitarianism if it would be that which maximized good consequences.
Yeah. And and again, I think there's a sort of, so I think that's definitely part of it. Like, it feels very, something I kind of said at the end of the when I was teasing this, the end of the previous one, but didn't really explore in the essay, is I think some people wrongly associate these positions with like scientific materialism, which is a separate issue, but you can kind of see how it's like, well, if there are all these other moral concepts and we're saying that's all kind of bullshit, and all we're focusing on is something that seems very tangible. Again, I think there's some fact value confusion here, but like I get there. And I think and there is also an element of that same kind of online contrarianism that you're talking about, that that's like, look, it's it's just much more based to like get over your normal squeamishness and push the guy into the trolley tracks,
Yeah.
or say you would online. This kind of the same way that it's like, you know like it's like some it's a little bit of the same impulse that might lead people to be like, actually, Stalin was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I don't think there's a I don't think there's a non-consequentialist defense of Stalin.
Sure.
What was I
Yeah,
going to say?
yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, no, I mean, I was just saying, like, I think some of the impulses, but also literally, yes, you better be a consequentialist if you're going to defend that. Like, you know,
I
best of
mean,
luck to you.
the thing I was going to say is like that. I think another reason is it kind of utilitarianism happened to emerge at the same time. Well, probably not happened. Emerged at the same time as kind of modern contemporary science emerged in the 19th century.
Yeah,
And I think because the other one was such a massively successful project, there's kind of a tendency to kind of push utilitarianism as if it kind of came along with that system. I've really been hating on consequentialism these past 2 weeks, but I must say, like, I'm relatively close to believing it's true, or at least it's very true in very serious ways. I think
yeah,
with the most important point being that to me it seems like pleasure is good and pain is bad in like a basic sense. Like it's not something which needs justification. Like it's kind of self-evident from the fact of what those things are, like just kind of the direct experience of those things with no other kind of argument. And then the whole question is basically, are those things the only good things and bad things?
right.
Or are there other things which matter? Or is that the sole value? And that's kind of the debate between consequentialism and non-consequentialism. And the other
Yeah,
debate based on
yeah,
like
that seems.
what are they good in relation to like the meta ethical questions. But on a basic level, like I think consequentialism has a lot going for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's reasonable. I mean, look, if you think that, if you think that it's a matter of indifference whether you're bringing about good consequences or know avoiding bad ones, nobody thinks that really, right? Like that's uh, maybe in the you know like I mean, take Cicero's point that there's no position that's so absurd it hasn't been advocated by a philosopher, but like, come on, like obviously consequences are morally important. So yeah, I and I'm also like broadly sympathetic to the idea that it's like, yeah, there's something that's like on a very basic level, like, you know, there's something that's, if not completely right, then not completely wrong about hedonism. Like you have it is in fact uh, it is in fact really bad for creatures who are capable of being in pain to be in pain, and it's it's good, and like happiness is good. I'm pro happiness, generally speaking. So yeah, I agree with that. I think that the reason sort of philosophically interesting question is other stuff good too, right? Are there other things, and are there other reasons that things could be objectionable that aren't about that, right? So, I think that there are, on the face of it, there would seem to be a lot of other reasons that that things could be objectionable, right? Somebody could be treated unfairly, even if, like, in the long run, they don't end up experiencing more pain as a result of it or whatever, right? Because it kind of all shakes out as time goes on, and they end up, they were passed up for a job for really bad reasons that they shouldn't have been, but then they ended up doing something else with their life that they like just as much, right? I don't think that means that they weren't done an injustice, and it seems like one of the points that I make at the very end of the essay, maybe to kind of start to move towards wrapping up, is like I think that there are a lot of ways in which um, capitalism in general and sort of unrestrained, neoliberal capitalism in particular, are really intuitively objectionable. That I don't think we should just sort of cede all those objections, that without a fight, right? Like I don't think we should be too eager to say, actually, all that matters is, all that matters is like counting up consequences, and none of the rest of the stuff is important. That like people end up with like way worse life outcomes because the way economic structures are, and that's like not just objectionable because we counted the number of good and bad outcomes, and it turns out that there were more bad than good. It's also objectionable because they didn't deserve that. It's not fair. That, like, I think that
Yeah,
there's
their freedom was limited.
yeah, exactly. Like, I think, and that's another thing, right? It's like it's I think that it's objectionable for people to have to experience you know domination, beyond what's like beyond what's inevitable, or you just have to kind of swallow for the sake of other values or whatever, right? They have a like I think that there's that I think that it's really bad that under capitalism most people have to spend half their waking lives, and it's only half because of past worker struggles, half of their waking lives, most days of the week, in environments where they spend all day taking orders from people who have no sort of democratic accountability to them. And it's like, I don't think that's just bad because people don't like it. Like, that might be one of the things that's wrong with it, but like, I don't actually think that's the only one.
Yeah. So Ben, what is on the docket for next week?
Next week, I believe, don't hold me to this, because there's still stuff that I need to read to see if I could get this together. But it's been a few weeks since there was a philosophy of religion one. I think that I think if it can be arranged, next week is going to be about hell.
Okay. I don't know. Will there be much interesting to say? Surely we'll both agree that, yeah, like, well, it's obviously like the thing that, like, of course it's bad. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
which is
not going to
also
do my
interesting
like,
that it's like,
I'm not going to do my semi-Catholic thing of like vaguely defending orthodoxy here. I'm going to be like, well, no, obviously not. It's like really bad.
yeah, yeah. No, you should, you should spend the week, drilling some, like reading some St.
I've tried
Augustine
to
and
do it
stuff till you.
before on Reddit Ask Philosophy, and it's like fucking hell, mate. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, yeah. So there is a specific debate about this that I want to look at, but we'll see if that comes together. But this is something I actually think might be interesting. But if but yes, and I will either be back in the kitchen or actually might be at my brother's house next week. So maybe I will not be back in the kitchen next week. For tomorrow, for the main show tomorrow, where for GTAA, we're gonna have Luke Savage talking about George Orwell. I am cautiously optimistic that I will not be in the kitchen. That the that like the home studio there's like some stuff I have to mess around with about sound levels and stuff when I get back there, but that'll be usable
And we can both show off
by
the microphones.
by tomorrow night. But in any case, looking forward to that. The essay is How to Be a Leftist Without Being a Utilitarian or Free Will Skeptic, and that is at benburgis.substack.com.
Which has been posted now for the 4th time in chat. Now we'll play the outro graphic. People have been telling me I should say left is best.
Nice.
Bye, everyone.